And there is no protection in capitulation. There just isn't. When we cede our power, when we do the work of our oppressor for them by giving up and turning over our rights and silencing our voices, we are participating in our own subjugation. And that I find deeply problematic.
Hello, I'm Rashad Robinson, strategist, civil rights leader, author, and I'm the host, your host, of Freedom Table. In this episode, we're going to look at the fallout from the executive orders Trump signed in his first day in office that have tried to make diversity efforts illegal and turn back the clock on equality. Who is getting hurt, and what can we do to fight back? We have assembled a stellar panel to just bring us through and into this conversation, to not just recount the atrocities we've experienced over this last year, but help us walk the path towards where we go. Up first is none other than Janai Nelson, a lawyer, professor, and president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She has argued numerous landmark civil rights cases, including one before the Supreme Court, around representation of Black voters in Louisiana to preserve the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Thank you for being with us, Janai. We have award-winning journalist Michael Harriot, who's a New York Times bestselling author, TV writer, and all-around storyteller whose work covers the intersection of race, politics, and culture. He's been honored by the National Association of Black Journalists and Webby Awards, the American Library Association, and many, many more. Thank you for being with us, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
And next up, we have Alphonso David, the first Black lawyer in the United States to litigate the right to marry for same-sex couples. Alphonso is now the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, where they are focused on moving the ball forward for Black folks all around the globe, building economic opportunity for marginalized communities. I'm so thankful that you could be here as well, Alphonso. So there's no way to sugarcoat it. We are under attack. Every part of Trump's administration and plenty of billionaires and agitators on the outside are figuring out ways to punish every person and cancel every program that ensures that racial and gender equity in our country. The executive orders gave them all new powers to launch these attacks, to make them bigger, broader, and faster. And just a matter of months after Trump's executive order took hold, MSNBC reported that around 300,000 Black women, 300,000, had been forced out of the labor workforce due to corporate DEI rollbacks, federal job cuts, constraints placed on small businesses due to the latest tariffs. Trump's retaliation campaign on DEI and diversity has frozen billions of dollars into federal research grants that could have helped move forward research into everything from opioid addiction to cancer to sickle cell and so much more. More than 50 universities have been investigated for alleged racial discrimination as part of Trump's push to end DEI. The number of Black students enrolled in many campuses has significantly dropped, leaving some campuses with Black populations as small as 2% of their freshman class. And in his bizarre address to the military's top leaders, the defense secretary insisted that every person in combat would return to the highest male standards, in effect laying the groundwork to exclude women, non-white people, and many others. So it is really hard to overstate how many millions of lives have been and will be affected by these executive orders. But as always, I am interested in how we fight back, what we do moving forward. Through my work at Color of Change and GLAAD and many other organizations, I've led campaigns and built winning strategies that have helped to change legislation, the way the media engages on this issue, the way that corporations respond. And that's the conversation I am hoping that we can have today. Not just what has happened, which we will talk about, but where we go from here. How we build so that the doors to education opportunities, to jobs, to government contracts aren't closed, and that we work to build the new doors for the future that all of us get to walk through together. So let's get to the conversation. I really want to start with you, Janai. We learned last week that the Trump administration is dropping its appeal of a federal court ruling that blocked a campaign against DEI, threatening federal funding to universities around the country. The federal judge's decision holds that anti-DEI efforts violated the First Amendment. This is obviously a massive and much needed win for higher education and the fight for DEI. But for administrators, professors, students in schools and universities, so many people that are impacted by this issue, people sort of don't know where to go, what to do next. How does this actually play out for them? And what is the line between what people think is legal and what's actually illegal, what they can do and what they can't do? Can you sort of break this down for us and where we go?
Sure. Thanks, Rashad. The decision was a monumental one in the fight for truth, the fight for free expression, the fight for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And what we've been telling all manner of leaders, whether they're corporate leaders, university administrators, et cetera, is that you must follow the law and not the lies. The law has been established for a very long time that it is unlawful to discriminate in the workplace. It's unlawful to discriminate in the university context. And diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility measures often prevent that sort of liability, prevent that discrimination from happening by educating people about difference, by empowering them with tools that they can use, and by opening pathways of opportunity for a broad spectrum of talent in this country. And none of that is unlawful or illegal. There are clear ways that I think most people in the workplace know are discriminatory, clear ways that one might discriminate against someone. You know, if you're basing your hiring decision on a protected characteristic, if you are creating a hostile environment, all of those are tried and true claims and are pretty clear. But encouraging people to embrace difference and diversity, making certain that everyone feels included and belongs in the is not illegal. In fact, it advances the protections under our civil rights statute. So this recent decision really affirms that and also makes it clear that you can express your alignment with these very sound principles and values, and that in and of itself is not a violation, and any effort to restrict it can violate your freedom of expression.
You know, it's such a, I really appreciate that answer. And it's, you know, such a tricky sort of position you're in. Like, you have to now go out and tell people to sort of move beyond the lies and the stories they've heard, even while they've probably set policies in place or have a thing in the back of their mind. And the kind of line between the written rules and the unwritten rules has always been a sort of deep piece of my work. And Michael, you recently wrote in Contraband Camp, your sort of incredible Substack, about your own experiences of learning in real time that a speaking engagement that you had as sort of an unnamed HBCU had been canceled, allegedly out of fear around these sort of rules. And I'm interested in how that moment played out, right? Because Janai's absolutely right. Now, you know, we want people to, you know, understand the law, not the lies. And you have these situations playing themselves out where people are complying in advance or complying without actually a rule. How did that play out for you? And can you kind of bring us into that story?
Well, my book was chosen by a number of HBCUs as what they call a common reader. Everyone, in this case, every freshman on campus reads the same book, and they discuss it throughout the year. And usually in the spring, they bring the author of the book to campus, and they have this huge discussion. And I was already at 15 minutes before I was scheduled to be on campus. They called and said, "Hey, don't come. we're canceling your speaking engagement. And through my reporting, I've found out that this has happened to a lot of people, and it is currently happening because there is the law, and then how colleges, how the Trump administration has instilled fear in many of these institutions and corporations. And because the law is so murky and it hasn't been fully litigated, and when it has been fully litigated, the institutions don't know. So it's created this chilling effect where everybody is afraid to do anything Black, right? We see at the University of Alabama where they canceled or ended 2 student magazines that focused on women and Black women because they were afraid of the Trump administration. And we see all of these colleges retreating. And it's, you can criticize them, but it's kind of understandable. What do you do, right? Do you subject your students to the whims of this litigious and vindictive administration, or do you protect them by kind of capitulating, right? Sometimes there is no one answer. You want to protect your students and you want to stand up to this administration. And he's put every institution in this conundrum.
Michael's book is Black AF History. You should get it. You should get it for friends and family. I definitely sent one up to my niece over the holidays. But I want to keep going down this road around sort of the impact and how this plays itself out. And I want to go to you, Alphonso. You have been such an important voice at the intersection of corporate America and business and venture capitalists. And sort of these rules. And you represented the Fearless Fund, the venture capitalist firm for women of color, for Black women entrepreneurs, who was one of the first targets in this series of lawsuits that was filed against corporate DEI programs. Can you sort of describe this attack? Not just sort of the kind of legal aspect of the attack, but sort of the chilling aspect, and then how it played out and what's the path forward?
I think at its core, for people to understand, the lawsuits that we're seeing filed against venture capital firms, not-for-profit organizations, and the like, it's about our ability to engage in self-help. It's about our ability to reinvest in our communities. It's about our ability to exercise freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That's what all these cases are about. Ultimately, when an organization can invest its own dollars in its own community and have been doing so for decades, is restricted from being able to do so, it's a chokehold on those communities. It's sort of like closing the spigot, closing the valve so that the monies, the resources no longer go into those communities. That is what the Fearless Fund was about. A right-wing advocate sues 2 Black women running a venture capital firm and a not-for-profit organization, arguing that by investing in women of color, in entrepreneurs, in people of color generally, it violates federal law, which is not true. And that's really important for folks to understand. There was a Supreme Court decision on college admissions, but it was narrow and it was specific. It addressed how race may be used in higher education admissions. It did not apply to employment. It did not apply to corporate policies. It did not apply to supplier diversity. It did not apply to the civil rights movement. It did not apply to venture capitalism. It did not apply to grant making. But the far right is attempting to characterize that decision to mean more than it is. And in so doing, they're looking to strip away protections that people of color, that Black people, that brown people, that women have used for decades to empower themselves and their communities. And that is important for us to understand, that when you conflate the affirmative action decision to diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's a political strategy that is looking to create confusion and is looking to chill lawful conduct.
Yeah.
In terms of what we do moving forward, we have to make sure that we are not buying into the noise, that we're not buying into the misinformation. We have people that are now questioning whether it is still legal to hire Black people, whether it's still legal to invest in organizations that are funding organizations like the LDF or organizations like mine. There is no law that prohibits you from investing your dollars with organizations that align with your interests and your values.
This is so important, right? It's not just a legal strategy, it's a political strategy. I would add it's also been a narrative strategy. And I'm interested, Janai, as you sort of think about the work that you're doing in the courts, what is the advice that you're also giving? Because I know so many people are coming to you that are at the sort of who are not lawyers, right? Who want to know what they do and how they engage. How are you telling people in powerful positions who may be in touch with LDF, who may be in touch with you, how are you telling them that they should be posturing and engaging? How should the folks who are watching, who are, could be powerful in their position, could be everyday people in their workplace? How should people be thinking about this?
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on what both Michael and Alphonso said, and it really does speak to the issue of complying in advance. You mentioned this too, Rashad, and there is no protection in capitulation. There just isn't. When we cede our power, when we do the work of our oppressor for them by giving up and turning over our rights and silencing our voices, we are participating in our own subjugation. And that I find deeply problematic. There's no reward for it. You don't get patted on the head and gain some immunization by doing it. Ultimately, the project is to create an even more unequal, unfair world, and also to privilege a very, very select and distinct group of people, and primarily white men, and cement their position of power. And there's no degree of supplication of capitulation that's going to change that. The only thing that's going to change that is us pushing back, us fighting back, us speaking out, us calling out what's happening, and being unequivocal about it and uncompromising on some of these positions. We are actually at a moment of, I think, extraordinary promise in this country, despite how horrible the circumstances are. But it is only in these circumstances of tumult and instability that there can be a breakthrough and there can be some progress and people can really understand the enormity of the threat that we are facing. So those folks who feel inclined to cower, I get it. I understand it. I understand the fear, but that is no recipe for protection and certainly not for progress.
Yeah. In all of my advocacy work, I always come across people that sort of have a story in their mind of who they would have been during the great history moments, right? How they would have stood up, right? They sort of wear the t-shirts that, makes them sort of in the lineage of Tubman or Douglas or Malcolm X or whoever. And these are these moments, right, where like on much more simple, perhaps not life and death situation. So I am interested, both Michael and Alfonso, from your perches, you all end up talking to a lot of people who are in positions of power, right? Or who are in positions where they could be useful, right? Michael, I'm sure you, as you've been writing these articles, you've had to call around to a lot of potential sources and tried to get people to go on record. Can you talk a little bit about that going on the record? And Alfonso, can you follow up and talk a little bit about the conversations in corporate America about trying to get people to go on a kind of a different type of record, a different type of engagement, both what you're hearing and sort of what do we need to do to unlock that type of sort of bravery and engagement that Janai was just speaking to?
We've been framing this argument as if these corporations and many of these companies are capitulating to Trump and erasing their DEI programs, or capitulating to the state legislatures, which is a very important part of this, right? This narrative that's being created in state legislatures. But we also have to consider the fact that part of this is that these companies were creating DEI programs not because it was their goal to make their companies and their institutions more diverse, but that because we forced them to, right? Because our work in these fields are forcing them to. We think that they're retreating when they're actually doing what they've wanted to do all of the time, right? Like some of these people that we see say, wow, they capitulated really easy. No, it's because like they just had the opportunity to retreat back to the racist company and the racist institution that they were before we forced these changes into the law. And now Trump is giving them cover to continue the process that marginalized us and the laws and the institutions that marginalized us for most of this country's history. And I think that is an important thing to consider.
I mean, I think in my conversations with folks in corporate spaces, I'm always struck by the power of assimilation and the power of fear. And there's this idea that what is happening to someone else. That what is happening does not affect me directly. And in those conversations, it's important to listen because it sometimes doesn't come out in those words, but also make sure that you're able to communicate with the person in a position of power or influence to make sure they understand what is at stake. I believe a number of years ago, maybe decades ago, we shifted from the politics of the community to the politics of the self. And people are so focused on the self about what they are going to lose. So when they see what's happening in the public square, they're not thinking about it affecting them directly. They're thinking about how their jobs are being protected and how speaking up could potentially compromise their positions in that corporate structure. But what I try to do in having these conversations is make sure they understand that by doing nothing, their positions are already compromised. That if you think that your job or your title distinguishes you from the person who was just let go or demoted simply because of their race, you're mistaken. And that's an important distinction. There are also others that are in these spaces that are working very strategically to make sure they hold the dam. Make sure that, yes, there's a lot of noise right now, but make sure that in those corporate spaces, they're able to distinguish between a risk assessment and the law. And what we're often seeing is in these corporate spaces, people are conflating the two. They're saying we can no longer do X, when in fact, that's not true. It may be that your risk for doing X is higher than it was before, but it doesn't mean that is against the law. And giving folks in these corporate spaces with the tools that they need to have these difficult conversations, right? Janai and I are lawyers, but many people in these spaces are not lawyers. So when they're debating these issues with their general counsels, they don't feel that they have the skills to be able to have these conversations. And I often leave them with just one simple question you should ask. Help me understand what law is being violated when we advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. What law? Because there is none. And don't point to me the executive order, because that's not really a law. Provide them with the tools so that they can have these difficult conversations without it being adversarial, but giving them the tools so that they can actually help advance the cause forward without compromising themselves.
You know, as someone who's done a lot of campaigns against corporations over the years, they do all sorts of risky stuff all the time. They're always in some risky stuff all the time. Definitely risky when it comes to like finding new ways to make money. They'll be risky when it comes to finding new ways to make money, to avoid certain types of laws, to avoid certain types of oversight. They're willing to deal with all sorts of risks. And so it does come back to this conversation of power. I am really interested in not just what we do to hold the dam, to sort of hold back on an imperfect set of policies, because let's face it, DEI was not perfect. It was the best we could get. I'm interested in, where does our affirmative path go? And I want each of you to answer this in your own way. Janai and Alphonso, both as lawyers, we are spending so much time as a movement responding to the work of Ed Blum and Stephen Miller and so many other folks in their legal institutions, attacking so much of what we've won over the years. But talk to me about, where does affirmative litigation play into that? affirmative campaigning. And then, Michael, talk to me about some of the stories that you think we need to tell, and the ways in which the story that we have been telling hasn't perhaps served us in terms of where we need to go.
Alfonso mentioned his incredible work representing the Fearless Fund. And we have a lawsuit with Lambda Legal where we represent the National Urban League and the AIDS Foundation in Chicago in a lawsuit that's challenging 3 of Trump's executive orders related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and the only one that also focuses on the protection of transgender people. And what I think is important is, yes, those are defensive cases. We are responding to an assault by someone in the White House who's trying to rewrite the laws by fiat. But what is important about this is that it allows us to tell more of a story about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. It allows us to lift up transgender people, not as a group of people who should be feared or that politicians should run away from, but as people who are as deserving of our protection and humanity and dignity as any other group. There are ways that we can use these moments to actually expand the lens of inclusivity and, who is part of the human family and what we all deserve. And so we use our lawsuits to do that as well. Obviously we fight the legal claims and we do all of that, but there's a narrative piece to this that I think is critically important. And we're also being really clear that we can't continue to run away from words. We can't continue to say, well, don't say DEIA, don't say woke, don't say this, don't say that. When the project is equity, when it's equality, when it's freedom, when it's power, I don't care what we call it, they're going to come after it. And so there comes a point where we actually have to stand our ground and say, yes, we, with a full chest, believe in these values and principles and are going to defend them. And here's why you should too. They work for everyone. There's not a circumstance in which those principles have been applied to communities that have been underserved and excluded, that it hasn't also opened up opportunity for other groups, including very much white women and other groups that have all helped make our productivity rise, make us a more innovative and creative nation, and even improve the bottom line of corporations. So we've got to tell those stories and narratives and make sure that that's what's centered, as opposed to the zero-sum, Hunger Games narrative that is peddled by this Trump regime.
I echo what Janai says, and I also point out all ways that, one, like the things that you're talking about dismantling are responses to racism. So what you're talking about when you're talking about the absence of DEI is you are saying, I agree to be racist, right? Like we know these systems without the intentional effort to make them inclusive and equitable are racist, right? Because just the human nature of corporations. We've seen it throughout the history of America. And you're also decreasing your effort to your ability to compete, right? That's the part that we don't understand, right? Like these schools that are erasing Black history are making their students dumber. We know that the college student population is decreasing, and there's going to be this crisis that are oncoming. Every school administrator knows it. And you're saying, well, I am going to decrease my chances to compete for students by making a hostile environment for people who are going to be in the population that are going to be coming to my school, right? You're decreasing your corporate ability to compete on the corporate level, because I always talk about this story about when I was in college and my roommate, he was an engineering major, and they have this program every year where they create a solar car, but the race was not to see who could go the fastest, but the longest. And everybody in the class had taken all the same classes. So everybody had the same ideas. And he took this idea from this kid that we had been mentoring that lived down the street, who told him, hey, I build bikes. So why don't you use a bike chain, right? and they won the race. And just because he had a different perspective, it made them more competitive, right? And that's what these corporations are facing. If you want to fill your boardroom with all white men, you're going to be sorely lacking. You're only going to reach one type of customer, one type of client, and one type of person who wants to invest. And you're decreasing your opportunities. So if you want to get beat, you can dismantle DEI.
I think, just echoing what Janai said initially and what Michael just said as well, we have to remember that we are in a fight for what we want our futures to look like. And in creating that future, making something sustainable means we have to use all of the tools in our toolbox. Defensive litigation, affirmative campaigns, narrative, all of those tools are important to create that future that we're looking to sustain. If we take one example that hopefully most people will understand, you've heard the narrative. More than 300,000 Black women have left the workforce. It doesn't mean that Black women were hired because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Black women are the most educated demographic in the United States, the most educated. And so their participation in the workforce has always been driven by qualifications, credentials, and performance. Taking that narrative, making sure that we apply it to an affirmative campaign, we apply it to affirmative litigation, and we incorporate it into defensive litigation is important. We cannot operate just on one silo. We have to use all of the tools to really create this universe that we want, because I can guarantee you our opponents are looking to erase us. There's a reason they don't want people to know Black history. There's a reason they don't want investors investing in our communities. And so unless we're willing to utilize all of the tools to create an inclusive environment, then we're going to create something that'll be fractured and not sustainable in the long run.
Right on. This is such an important conversation. It's such an important conversation for what we all do next. In my most recent op-ed on News One, you can read all about sort of some next steps that I propose. Everything from taking on some of the funders of these anti-DEI campaigns. And if you go to a university that has an endowment, or if you work with a foundation or engage with a foundation that has an endowment, or you have worked someplace that has a pension fund, who's investing that fund? What are their politics? What are they fighting for? We have to work to cut off the spigot for those that would do us harm, not allowing people to say buy our products and use our service by day and take away our opportunities by night. This is all part of how we need to be participating in this moment that we are in, both being incredibly informed about what we're facing, but also aware of the power that we have in our community to be able to, separate the law from the lies. And separating the law from the lies is going to be an incredible part of the work moving forward. Because this next year of what Trump is trying to do, the last year was about removing all these programs. This next year is about making us invisible in all of these spaces. And we have to build the power to fight back. This conversation has been so great. Thank you for joining me, Janai, Michael, and Alphonso. Please check out their organizations and the work they are doing. Find ways to support each of them in their efforts, and find ways to raise your voice in this moment where we have to fight not just to protect the things that we won, but actually work to build and imagine the next phase of how we get to participate in our society.